Welcome to the October 2021 Now Reading. Graciously sponsored by the Ontario Arts Council. Thank you, OAC. This month, our theme is home and away, travel and or not. I lacked the fat gold earring that, by the ancient code of seafarers, would have paid for my burial in a foreign port should I have needed the service. Excerpted from A Wilderness Called Home, Dispatches from the Wild Heart of Canada by Charles Wilkins. Tonight's readers are Marj Clayton. We got too many Claytons. Clayton by and Vera Constantineau. And our first reading will be by Marj. And Marj says, Marj was born to artist parents in Port Arthur, Ontario in the 1960s. At 11, her father, Charlie, shared his interest in black and white photography with her. Charlie taught her how to see light, compose a picture, and process and print in the family's darkroom. Her parents were free thinkers and supported her interest and unconventional decision to study photography at Confederation College for 2 years. Shooting commercially didn't interest her at 19, she chose to work in rural Bolivia as a part of the Canada World Youth Cultural Exchange Program. On completion of the program, she was keen for other international opportunities and went to England 2 years later with the Student Work Abroad program. Marj has lived in London, England for 14 years, Bolivia for more than 3, and has made more than 16 trips to West Africa. Most of her photographic essays have been self-financed. However, she did take on a few commissions with NGOs like Oxfam, Save the Children, and CARE. Her photographs have been published and exhibited in Canada, the UK, and Bolivia. Marj has had an interest in poetry and story writing since she was a child, but it wasn't until her 50s that she found her way into memoir writing. She is currently working on a book of short stories about her nomadic life photographing. So Marj, you have about 20 minutes.
Thank you. And I want to actually start by thanking NOW for allowing me this opportunity to share my work. And to my readers, Andrea, Mariut, Suzanne, and especially Tessa, my mentor. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully with some success. Oh, dear. Okay, one moment. So I'm going to only show one picture per piece. I have 3 pieces I'll be reading. If anyone has any comments or questions, if you could just save it till the end, and we'll share my email address if somebody wants to get in touch and make any suggestions or comments. So the first one is called Outside Insight. Decades after my first trip to Bolivia, I had a meeting with a well-known photo editor in the UK. He gave me some clarity and insight into what made my work unique. What separated me from other photographers was the relationship I had with people I photographed. Some of them I knew for years. Others, like my adopted family in Bolivia, decades. Time and connection to people I photographed created more than images. experiences, conversations, and stories made my pictures more meaningful. Now what I had to do was express in words the rest of the story. That's when I told the editor I wasn't a writer. There was a mental block when it came to words. It started in grade 1, when I was sent to the slow group for kids who had trouble reading them. In high school, my challenge was writing. To help get me started with an essay, my mother suggested I write like I spoke. My mind was an anxious bunny in a warren of riddled rabbit holes that jumped from one idea to the next. So I wrote in pencil. When the pages gave way and light poked its way through, I switched to ink. The holes were replaced with hash marks, squiggly lines, red arrows, and asterisks. Fortunately, I have a stubborn streak, and despite my struggles with writing, I signed up for a grade 13 creative writing class. I loved the reading list and the teacher, who was fabulously entertaining, but I was discouraged by my marks and didn't continue. 2 years later, when I was preparing to go to South America, my ever-optimistic mother suggested I bring a diary. I chose a hardback journal wrapped in electric blue silk. It looked out of place in the stark surroundings of the Andean farm where I ended up, but that didn't stop me from sliding it out of its case to write. Initially, writing was a way to preserve memories, but in time it became a way to cope with my frustrations and homesickness. Filling the journal's pages became a ritual, where passages about work on the farm or cultural beliefs were sandwiched between more personal experiences. Those entries helped me to write a story on my return, but my words didn't do the experience justice. A writer offered to help. After I was interviewed, she wrote a piece to go with my photographs. But not only did the piece fail to make me relive the experience, I was offended by her use of the word peasants when she spoke of my family. But she wasn't there, so how could she tell my story? Years later, a gallery curator accused me of trying to tell someone else's story. As a non-Bolivian, who was I to write about their customs and culture, as if I were a local or maybe an anthropologist? I took the comment as a criticism and later understood that I needed to share my own experiences traveling and interacting with the people I met. Writing never came as naturally as photography did. And in my first attempts, I spent more time tweaking photo layouts than crafting any of the words that accompanied them. After months working in this way, I realized the only way I would be able to coax the stories out onto the page was to give them space. I deleted all photographs and made a deal with myself. I would only add images to the stories once the words and ideas could stand on their own. It took a few more years and another conversation before I began to change the way I saw challenges. This time, the poignant conversation was between my brother Francis and I. He is a nationally acclaimed athlete and wrestling coach who trains students to overcome obstacles, and I thought he might be able to help me overcome mine. Photography was something I was good at, but after my conversation with the editor, I realized I needed to write stories that existed behind them. I felt stuck. That was my obstacle. The first thing Francis said was I shouldn't do what I was good at. Confused and resistant to his words, I looked up, waiting for an explanation. That is limiting, he said. You need to be challenged, to fail forward and grow. Francis didn't see a challenge as a problem, but an opportunity. His words made me feel uncomfortable, but I heard them. Until that moment, I hadn't realized that not being good at writing was the reason I had to do it. Beginnings. I was 19 and my application for an international adventure had been accepted. Months later, shortlisted applicants were interviewed. We were up to our necks in winter when the representative from Canada World Youth arrived. Her questions lasted maybe 20 minutes, and when it was over, my name was put forward as a potential candidate. There was no guarantee I'd get a place on one of their teams, but at least I was on the list. Since I can remember, I have wanted to travel to distant lands, to go beyond the maps, magazines, and cross-country camping trips. It was spring when the phone finally rang. Mom answered it and whispered, "Canada World Youth," before handing the receiver over to me. "Hello, Marj. Are you still interested in participating in the program?" I assumed it was a follow-up call and stopped breathing when she told me there was a spot available on the Bolivia team. "You are under no obligation to take it," she explained. I shrieked. The genie was out of the bottle with her offer. A childhood dream had come true. It began in the summer of 1984 with orientation camp. Our group of 21 Canadians were stationed right by the ocean in Nova Scotia, while our Bolivian counterparts spent their first week in the city of La Paz. Canadians and Bolivians learned about the structure of the program, its rules, and details about our partnering country. We had lectures on Bolivian history, culture, and politics, along with a week's worth of Spanish lessons. Language wasn't my strength, and the moment the teacher spoke of infinitives, my attention waned. Being an Anglophone, barely getting by with our mandatory French classes in school, I never really understood the way grammar worked. I envied Natalie, a girl from Ottawa. She was good at languages and helped with problems in grammar or vocabulary, supplying definitions to unfamiliar words in Spanish or English. And her first language was French. My challenges with Spanish began in that first lesson when we were told there were 2 different ways to say "I am." I was thrilled to have a choice until I learned each one had to be used in a particular way. The first, "yo soy," is used when stating my name, nationality, or gender, while the temporary "yo estoy" when speaking of a condition like illness. But nothing was permanent. Name, sex, nationality could all be changed. The temporary "yo estoy" was also flawed, as the illness, if serious, could lead to the permanent condition of "I am not." Struggling with the grammar made me adopt Tennyson's motto for the Light Brigade: "Ours is not to reason why." Then there was the difference between being and having. In Spanish, I could not be hungry. I could be Marj in the permanent form or be sick in the temporary form, but I could never be hungry. I could only have hunger. To avoid a cerebral explosion, again I repeated to myself, "Ours is not to reason why," and decided to memorize rather than understand. During the last class, our instructor, Soledad, encouraged us to practice and not to worry about making mistakes. What was important was attempting to communicate with the Bolivians and make them feel welcome. Up until now, everything seemed like theory, but with the arrival of our partner team, the adventure would begin in earnest. It was hot, and most of us Canadians were scattered about the wooden deck taking the sun. Around midday, there was a series of thundering booms in the distance, like a drum marking time. We all stopped to listen. The sound continued and grew louder. After a few moments, a group of young men and women appeared. They danced in ponchos and played Andean instruments as they made their way up the dusty dirt road towards us. I held tightly onto the knot in my throat, self-conscious and unwilling to be emotional in public. Others in my group were less hung up about that and cried with the dramatic arrival of our partner team. I may not have shed any tears, but the effort the Bolivian team made was really touching and motivated me to access my inner extrovert and take some initiative. It didn't matter that I only knew a few words in Spanish. I would use all of them and show the Bolivia team how much I wanted to get to know them. The Bolivians and Canadians were milling about the dining hall waiting for lunch. Most people talked with their friends in small groups. I was petrified, but wouldn't allow myself to back down from my commitment to communicate. The Bolivian team was composed of mainly university students from the city and farmers or campesinos from the country. Often we had been told to be careful and culturally sensitive, especially when interacting with the farmers, as they were known to be shy, humble, and especially conservative. It was because of their humble and quiet nature that I chose to speak to a farmer. There was a country fellow by himself, so I forced myself to initiate a conversation before others joined him, and I lost my nerve. I gathered up all the Spanish I had memorized and meekly began with, "How are you?" He replied and quickly returned the question. There was a pause in the conversation. As I began thinking about lunch, I realized that was something I could use to carry on our conversation. I pulled out what words I'd learned in Spanish, pleased that I'd remembered that I couldn't be hungry, only have it. I felt a renewed confidence. Without realizing it, I had used the word hombre when I should have used hambre. And instead of saying I was hungry, I announced I had a lot of men. Optimistically unaware of my error, my confidence increased. The weather seemed a topic I could manage. This time I mistakenly used the permanent I am along with the word caliente, which according to my dictionary meant hot. But instead of telling the young man I felt warm, the word caliente, together with the permanent I am, conveyed the message that I was a hot woman. Natalie nearly fell over. She was quick to slip into the role of interpreter and translated my entire conversation. I was beginning to have worldly experiences, and I hadn't yet left the familiar surroundings of my own country. Finding my voice and not worrying about making mistakes had certainly made an impression. David, our group leader, laughed as he advised me to lock my bedroom door, saying my new Bolivian friend might think he's going to get lucky tonight. And that was just the beginning. Ready or not? Ready or not, we were going. The cultural exchange gave a series of lectures to prepare us for the second half of the program. We would be so high in the Bolivian Andes, there wouldn't be any trees or mosquitoes. The subsistence farmers we would live with supported themselves, cultivating a livelihood out of poor soil in challenging circumstances. Homes were built of adobe, and inside them, the most necessary in the way of furniture, a bed, maybe a chair or an old table. There was no running water, central heating, or electricity. In Canada, the program was touted as a cultural experience, and they expected us to adapt as necessary. I felt mostly ready to cope with the minimum of conveniences, with really only one concern that I could pinpoint. When asked if anyone had questions or worries about our imminent trip to Bolivia, the room was silent. We were 21 Canadians, and I was the only one with my hand up. Where, I asked, trying not to expose my anxiety, do people go to the bathroom? I was hoping for some secret location, a clandestine toilet, a collection of large rocks or shrubs to hide behind, a small tent, anything that would give a little privacy. The official bathroom, I was told, was a 25-minute walk to the old dried-up riverbed. As my brain digested the words, a variety of scenarios popped like kernels in my head. I'm a master of misinterpreting maps and instructions, written or verbal, and easily get disorientated. I'm not sure if the concussions I endured as a child had anything to do with it, or if it was just because I stopped breathing when I was flustered. En route in the Miami airport, my thoughts ran reckless, like packs of wild dogs, with them utter despair, as I imagined looking for the dried-up riverbed. Not finding the makeshift bathroom in itself wouldn't be that big a deal. But being so lost on the high Andean plains with no hope of finding my way back scared me. I couldn't face the airport stores or food courts. I had lost my appetite and went outside to the terminal's patio. The humidity was stifling, while the darkness so intense, it was difficult to see. I found a place to sit on a hard cement bench. Confident I was alone, I wept. Maybe I wasn't ready. Like myself, the airline wasn't ready either. The boarding attendant announced our flight was delayed, while comments about hora boliviana, or Bolivian timekeeping, circulated amongst the passengers. After an hour waiting, we were airborne, treated to that night's in-flight entertainment, which featured a spectacular electrical storm accompanied by flickering cabin lights. When the plane shuddered, I wondered how much longer it would be before the oxygen masks spilled from the ceiling compartments. Claudia, a few seats behind, screamed, while I imagined our plane plummeting into the Gulf of Mexico, leaving us bobbing in the darkness like live bait. I forced my thoughts into something more positive, and when we hit this next set of air pockets, I imagined being on the rides at the summer fair and smiled. By the time we landed, I was so exhausted I completely forgot about the altitude. That was until I slung my pack onto my back. It felt heavier, and I needed to take deeper than usual breaths to satisfy my lungs. I closed my eyes, then wondered how long I would manage to remain standing. A few more deep breaths, and we were ushered outside towards the old blue and white school bus. Our group leader had arranged for the charter, and the driver was ready to go. Wearily, I boarded the old bus and placed my pack on the empty seat next to me. As we pulled away from the curb, we became a part of a multi-layered choreography in El Alto. We shared the road with a convoy of other vehicles and had to negotiate our passage with a collection of stray dogs, cats, and even a small flock of sheep. In the street, between the cars or on the side of the road, were vendors, some walking with food carts, while others had wheelbarrows overloaded with fruit. There were porters, too, men loaded down with unimaginable-sized cargoes strapped onto their backs. It was like watching a cartoon, an exaggerated version of reality. As the traffic began to slow down, we approached a group of vans that had been converted into minibuses. Young children shouted out destination names. Some were on the street, while others were crouched inside the open doorways of the vans, inviting passengers inside and collecting fares. Amongst the chaos and heavy congestion existed an inspiring vibrancy I had never experienced before. And like those I watched in the streets, I felt ready for all of it. Ready, maybe, but it wasn't time. We would spend the next week attending more lectures and acclimatizing. A week went by before we traveled to my counterpart Escolastica's community. It seemed fitting to arrive in the customary hora boliviana, known by Canadians as late. Before the sunlight had completely disappeared, we made our way to Escolastica's parents' farm. There were no roads that went directly to the house, only narrow footpaths that snaked their way around fields and riverbeds. The truck hired to get us there creaked and groaned as it bounced through dormant fields. We clung onto the truck's sideboards, not wanting to lose ourselves or our luggage along the way. It stopped in the middle of a field and we unloaded our bags. Before heading towards the house, our group leader brought my attention to a curious adobe structure a few hundred feet from the family compound. It was tall and narrow with a large open space where I imagined a door should be. When I scanned the flat treeless plain, it was the only one like it in the area. Mr. Mamani, my host father, along with several of his children, made me an outhouse. It didn't have a door, but they constructed a waist-high brick wall in front for privacy. They had never seen an outhouse before, but to make my stay more comfortable, they cobbled together the supplies and made me one anyway.
Thank you very much, Marj.
Thank you, Tessa.
I'm sure everybody got a good chuckle out of that and enjoyed your work. If you want to put your email into the chat for people to contact you directly, that would be great. And we appreciate you reading for us. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Tessa.
Our second reader is Clayton Bai. Clayton is currently serving as NOWW's president. He has lived in Northwestern Ontario for most of his life and now resides in Dryden. Clayton writes books for a living, but he occasionally releases shorter fiction and poetry. Tonight's reading is one of his short horror pieces that has been published a number of times.
Tessa?
So take it away, Clayton. Yes.
I apologize. I got the theme wrong. That's next month's theme.
I'm sure we can live with that.
Well, I'll ask folks. I quickly cobbled something together when I heard that. So we can continue along the travelogue style, or you can have I have two stories, actually. One is a short horror story, and then one is a lighter story to go with the theme of darkness and light. So what would you like?
Oh, it's up to you. You read whatever, our themes are suggestions for people. We like to hear stuff on theme, but if you have something else, that's fine too.
Well,
so your choice.
Let's see quick show of hands. You want more travel stuff here in a way, or do you want fiction? Fiction? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 6. All right, then it's fiction. Don't say I didn't warn you. This is from a collection of my short stories called Behind the Red Door. I tend to write darker things when I do fiction, and this was a mixture of that. So what I picked with that theme in mind that I had was something really dark, and then something kind of, I don't know, flippant. I'm not sure what it is, but it's a little more fun. The story that I'm going to share with you first is called The Speed of Dark, and I won a number of awards with this story. And it also was part of a larger collection, or a larger story. This, just to give you a little background, the fellow that I'm writing about here is actually one of the bad guys in a couple of novels that I did. And this introduces him. The Speed of Dark. Richard Bartholomew's little brother sat on the bottom stair and studied the line bisecting the rock-walled basement. "What's the speed of dark?" he asked. Trying to ignore the sudden knot of pain in his stomach, Richard answered, "Doesn't have a speed, Tim. Darkness is just the absence of light." Shadows, almost lifelike in their furtive movement, crawled more inches away from the walls. Richard pretended not to see them. "Light moves fast?" Tim asked. "Nothing faster," Richard said. Small windows atop the western wall glowed with that special golden light which always seems to be reserved for crisp autumn evenings. These tiny glass squares of life cast beams of airy gold into the spreading gloom. Billowing ribbons of dust danced along the slender rays, entertaining the watching boys, distracting them until the darkness closed in, until the color of the light changed and took on the hue of blood. Suddenly, Richard heard his mother's voice within his head. "Somebody's got to go." She stood as a rock in the middle of the hall, blocking the way out to the world. Had taken her purse up before speaking and dug out the keys to the old motor cart. Then casually, as if instructing him to do something as mundane as washing the breakfast dishes, she made her wishes clear. "You decide," she said, "but I want somebody gone by dark." Mother had locked them down, as she always did when going out. The rumble of the engine as she eased along their graveled drive reminded Richard of distant thunder. A cold shiver walked up and down his spine. Bile rose in his throat. Richard wiped the memory from his mind and joined his brother on the steps. He could feel the younger boy tremble. The cool, dry basement air was sour with the scent of Tim's fear. A centipede scurried across the floor, its serpentine movements and glossy red skin, the perfect harbingers of this. How do we get out of this? Richard asked himself. Action was required. Becky had proved that. Nobody gets to refuse Mother, not even once. Tim had Becky's eyes. Richard had been able to keep her alive in his mind because Tim had her eyes, gray, with striations of blue and yellow. "Want to try busting a window, Tim?" he asked. Tim looked up at Richard with their sister's long, dead eyes and said, Can't bust those rocks. So what good is it going to do? Well, we can't just sit here and wait for it, Tim. She don't take no for an answer. We got to get out. Windows are too small, Tim said. Ain't no way to change that. The boys allowed their gaze to follow the lines of the walls. The basement had nothing in it but the stairs on which they sat, 4 bare rock walls, a hardened earth floor, and a couple of rows of 6-inch windows. They'd already tried to force the door at the top of the stairs. Hadn't managed it, not even when there'd been 3 of them. Can you make me not afraid, Richard? Can you make it so I don't have to go into the dark? Richard started crying. Watch the windows, Timmy, he said. Let the sun fall on your face. Tim got up and walked over to one of the diminishing beams of light. He turned toward the window from which the beam originated and then stepped into the path of the reddening light. Richard, he exclaimed, it's still warm. The older boy didn't have the heart to tell Tim the warmth would fade, that there was no way to escape the darkness. The problem wasn't the speed with which darkness traveled, he thought, but one involving the very nature of darkness. Richard hung his head, tears darkening the soil below. He didn't know how to explain that the dark was already here. It had always been here. Tim fed them for weeks. Mother was pleased. One day after finishing a particularly good roast, she even went so far as to say he tasted better than Becky. Richard figured that was because he was younger. At night, when greasy rain fell on the rotting roof, creating phosphorescent droplets, which occasionally fell on his skin and burned him, Richard would conjure up images of what his mother would say when the time came to eat him. Richard didn't have an ounce of fat on him, she would brag. Or perhaps he made a fine stew. The boy could hear the smacking of her wet red lips, could envision her licking juices from claw-like fingers, her flat black eyes studying each morsel as she calculated how to get all the precious meat from his dead bones. On the days Richard wasn't locked in the cellar, when his mother chose not to go foraging for edibles in what was left of the city, he enjoyed walking in the fields. Trees hadn't yet recovered from the firestorm, but clover and hay and the like had come up greener than ever. He also watched dragonflies. They weren't birds, but they were alive, and Mother wouldn't eat them. Richard shuddered. Goose flesh rose upon his arms. Time to head back. Mother was cooking up the last of the tin steaks. She'd be angry if he was late. The boy pushed through waist-high grass, poisoned grass, stuff he contemplated eating on many previous occasions as a way to finally end the headaches and the nausea and the aching in his chest. Though he was older, Richard was more afraid of the dark than Tim had been. So recently, rather than thinking about ways to kill himself, he'd begun to harbor a secret dream. Down in the black space that was now his mind, the boy was cultivating the thought that maybe, just maybe, he could find the nerve to make Mother a dessert. And that, folks, is a play on words. As I said, he was dark, but the character that he became was really, really, really dark. So it kind of makes sense. Now, I promised you a lighter story, also in the same collection, which was very eclectic. And while I'm pulling it up here, I'll just mention that this one takes place on Earth instead of the world that I was just reading about. And it is, well, for me, it's whimsical. So I'll just let you enjoy what it is. It's called The Last Unicorn. I don't suppose I'll ever know where she came from or what she really was. But the summer day I found the unicorn on my grandfather's farm, my life was changed forever. She was black, about 16 hands tall, and had one conical horn sprouting from her forehead. That was when she wanted to be her version of a horse. She was often a man about my age who was interested in learning English and all else she could study. I named her or him Bobby because that was as close as I could come to pronouncing her name in unicornese. Since she was a shapeshifter, Bobby could become just about anything she wanted to be, and her favorite form of all seemed to be the unicorn. Who knows? Maybe she was longing for the days of Camelot and the scent of battle, for she would have been the fiercest warhorse of them all. "Do you want to ride?" she asked during one of our English lessons. I was too scared to do anything but shake my head in the negative. Her green eyes were deep pools of disappointment, but she said nothing. I'm not a rider, never was, and it wasn't about to start then. At best, ours was an uneven relationship. Never 100% sure of my own sexuality, dealing with a woman who could also be a man created some deep down confusion in me. If you had said anything about me being attracted to a man, I'd have so punched your lights out. But there it was. Where did she come from? She never told me. But from the occasional hints, I suspected it was from a place very far away from mine. She stunned me one afternoon by asking me if I wanted to learn how to shapeshift. You can do it, she said. It's a mind over matter thing that once you know, you'll never forget. Our relationship went to a new level then. I suppose I was a fair student, but I think she was a better teacher. By the time the autumn freeze had become, we were quite the pair. I was a tough Indian pony, part of my heritage, I guess, and she was her magnificent self. One evening, she came to the table as a beautiful woman, dressed in a long red evening gown. Yes, she could shift clothes. Later, when she was reclining near the fireplace in a threadbare armchair, one of those overstuffed things you can only find at yard sales, she said, "Don't you think it's time?" "Time for?" I asked, the scent of wood smoke tickling my nose. "You and I," she said. "It's inevitable. It must be done." "I don't understand, Bobby." "I'm the last, Brad," she said, and paused for a moment. "It's what I came here for. If our race is ever to grow again, it will begin here." I was shocked. I admit to having thought about her in that way, but making me a breeder? Never. "I planned this carefully, Brad. You have the right genes, and the fact that you're mixed up with respect to your sexual identity is a sign that you were meant for me." She smiled. "You must admit you like me a little." I swallowed. "And will you be staying?" She just looked at the floor. It was answer enough. I didn't need to ask the other side of that question. I really was nothing more than good breeding stock. "You're asking a lot, don't you think? Have I not given you much?" She was, of course, making a comment about my newfound talent. What did I care, though, about shape-shifting when I'd be losing my own child and someone I thought would be a wonderful lover? Bobby didn't argue. I'll give her that. She'd stated her case plainly, then left me to make my decision. Give up Bobby and a child to save a race, or simply let the race die. Oh. My own thoughts had given me the answer. Give up Bobby? When had I decided that she was mine to give up? When had I begun to care so much? And if I really cared, how could I refuse this request? It was a few months before she showed, so we had plenty of intimate time together during which she showed me wonderful things. And in the end, when she told me she must leave, I knew I loved her. The day came and Bobby in her beautiful human form stood within my embrace. "I have something I'd like to point out, Brad." I just looked down at her. "You're the last one now, and the first." "I don't get it." "I'm not from here, Brad. That means when I leave, you'll be the last unicorn on Earth." but you'll also be the first of our race to settle here. I hope there will be more. You mean you lied to me? No, I was the last of us on Earth until I found you. But I'm not a unicorn. She smiled and said, You aren't? Then it hit me, and almost simultaneously, something stirred within my abdomen. This time Bobby's smile was brilliant. Congratulations, she said, and slipped out of my embrace. I must go, but I'm so happy for you. You're going to be a father. And I just have to get out of this here. Oh, sorry. So, he really was, what shall we say, bisexual? He got to be both a mummy and a daddy. So thanks for letting me read those, even though that wasn't the right theme. Over to you, Tessa.
Thank you very much, Clayton. Yes, those were both very intriguing pieces. I love that, the unicorn thing. So did they both conceive or just the one?
Oh, they both did.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
What was the title of the book that those stories are in?
Behind the Red Door.
Behind the Red Door. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was very enjoyable. So
Thanks.
We will move on to our third and final reader. Our third reader is Vera Constantineau. Vera believes that variety is the spice of life. She writes in a number of Japanese forms, including haiku, senryu, heibun, and tanka, as well as Western poetry, short fiction, and creative nonfiction. She's a member of NOWW, the Sudbury Writers Guild, Haiku Canada, the Haiku Society of America, the Canadian Authors Association, and Parkland Poets. Vera is the 6th Poet Laureate for the city of Greater Sudbury. She has just recently completed the first draft of her first Haibun collection. Vera, take it away.
Thank you, Tessa. Clayton, that was really interesting. Thank you for that. And Marj, I love your stories. You know that already. So this story is called The Do-Over. It's part of a bigger work. I don't know how big yet. A guy's first love is almost always his mother. So it was with Thomas. When she left him and his dad, Thomas's heart broke for the first time. He watched his father become the loneliest man he knew, a man who never got over the end of his marriage. 25 years and he was still alone. As for himself, Thomas knew he was also still looking for a way to bring the pieces of his own heart back together. He'd been so sure he'd found the one, but 2 years of living with Jenny ended with a loud slamming door. That was a year ago, yet the sound still echoed in his head. Would he end up bitter and lonely like his father? He hoped not. In the early morning light, Thomas's reflection showed him what he already knew. His hair was too long, and he looked like an out-of-work 35-year-old with money troubles. He sighed and realized he'd spent enough time staring out at Lake Ontario. Late March, and this year the ice was gone. He imagined the marine traffic from all around the world that would soon cross the horizon, reminding him of home. As a kid, he'd spent entire summer days watching Lake Huron for ships passing the lighthouse. He loved the water. His cell phone rang then. Like its AI knew he needed to hear the sound of a human voice. A glance at the screen and he felt a glimmer of hope. Hey, Steve, tell me this is a good news day. Steve was his go-to rep at the union office when there were jobs to assign. 5 minutes later, any hope for work was gone, and there was only one thing to do. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, Thomas stood in front of the dresser, head down, eyes closed. He slid open the end drawer, then opened his eyes, and there it was, the ring box right in the middle where Jenny said she left it. It wasn't like he thought she was coming back. He already heard through the grapevine she had a new man in her life. Truth? They were through the day he'd given her this ring. She said he'd backed her into a corner with it, like he was asking her to accept a life she didn't want, and she couldn't do it. He'd left the ring there all these months thinking it represented a kind of money-in-the-bank contingency plan. Say one day he needed a few bucks, he could walk into any pawn shop with a ring set and come out with cash. Today was the day. A guy had to eat and a guy had to work. It was all part of being a guy, right? Well, the cupboard was literally bare. Filled with new resolve, Thomas walked to the front hall closet, pulled on his jacket, and tucked the ring box into his pocket. Plenty of men Thomas knew from the job had thrown in the towel long ago. They'd ended their trips to the union hall, accepting the obvious: there was no work to be had. He knew he would have to step outside his comfort zone, and he was okay with that. The heating bill still needed paying, and the hydro too. He'd lowered the thermostat to Northern Ontario levels back in the beginning of January, and he'd felt the chill. He knew it was a sure tell that he'd become acclimatized over the past 10 years in Toronto. He'd grown used to warmer winters and lower snowbanks. This jacket alone was a sure sign of his conversion to Southerner. No Northerner would think it suitable outerwear on any late March day. He tugged on leather gloves and zipped up. Thomas remembered buying the jacket, seeing it as a symbol of his new life. With his welding ticket in hand and with the condo boom, Toronto needed metal workers. He'd hired on immediately with a big construction firm. The paychecks were great. Life was great. He was smart with money, and he'd saved hard and bought this place. He never regretted the condo, but yeah, man, he did have regrets. Thomas shook off his dark thoughts, no falling into the poor me pattern. He didn't want to become like the old guys at the union hall, spouting doom and gloom in every conversation. Sure, the downturn had dried up jobs, but things would turn around. The nearest pawn shop was 15 minutes away. The weak sun warmed the sidewalks, and he felt good. Thomas thought again about his empty cupboard. He'd make some chili, he thought. Get groceries so he could enjoy a toasted tomato sandwich and buy some soups for lunches. A wave of hunger rolled through him, and he stepped up his pace. The jingle of the pawn shop bell was, in Thomas's opinion, way too cheerful for the people who had to come here. He stepped to the counter and pulled the ring box from his pocket, opened it, and set it in front of an older guy in a company t-shirt. The business of pawning anything was unfamiliar to him, but it turned out to be quick and successful. Soon he'd gathered up a neat stack of bills and put them in his wallet. As he turned to leave, the guy behind the counter said, "You know, I see it all here. You're one of the lucky ones. You got the ring back. And you get a do-over. You're one of the lucky ones." Outside, Thomas took stock. His condo fees were covered now, and he could eat, but it was still time to get a job. Back when he was set to buy the rings, the jeweler told him the 2-month paycheck rule, and he'd been skeptical. Today, he was glad he'd followed the advice. Still, money or no money, the plan had to be get work. Plans, Thomas laughed at his naivete. Plans had come and gone over the years. Plan number 1, get out of the place where he grew up. Successful. His father was one of the last lighthouse keepers on Manitoulin Island. He couldn't bear to give up the silence of the life he'd lived. After losing his job as a lighthouse keeper, Dad bought a small house along the shore. From the deck, his father could still see the lighthouse he'd tended for years. He even volunteered to oversee the place after the installation of the automated lights. He just couldn't give it up. Too bad Thomas's mother hadn't felt the same. She was willing to give up everything: his father, the marriage, and him. Thomas had watched hundreds of ships pass their house in season. To him, they represented a world he yearned to see that existed beyond the island. In his teens, he'd become restless and, yes, rebellious. Then in high school, he'd taken welding classes and knew he'd found the thing he wanted to do forever. He dreamed of the day he could get out of the North and get a better life. He planned to get a good job, have a place of his own, and meet a woman with staying power, unlike his mother. A feeling akin to fear walked up his spine. No way, he thought. He wasn't his old man. Yes, he'd lost the job he loved, and he hadn't been able to hang on to his almost fiancée, never mind wife, so what was next? A pit of loneliness like the one his old man had dug for himself? Thomas shook his head, wondering what was wrong with him today. He'd gone north for plenty of long weekends and the occasional week's holidays. He and his father would take the old boat out and fish from dawn to dusk. Maybe it was because he'd grown up some. Maybe it was because his father had grown older. Whatever the reason, these days they'd settled into a comfortable relationship. Once he found work, he'd have to think about heading up there again. Across the street, Thomas spotted an open bakery and cafe. He crossed and went inside and had an immediate flashback to his childhood. He thought of his mother taking him into the bakery into the town near the lighthouse. On each visit, she'd buy him a cream puff, and he thought he'd never had anything so good in his entire life. He always ate it in slow motion to make it last. He breathed in, thinking that nothing smelled as good as a bakery. Thomas savored the mingled scents, fresh bread, hot sugar, and wanted to lick his lips. A tall woman with gray hair stood in front of a refrigerated display case, sliding small tarts from a tray into a line, and she smiled, imagining that he imagined she could hear his thoughts. Meat tarts, fresh out of the oven, only $3 each. I'll have 2 and a coffee, black. The woman slid 2 of the tarts onto a white plate and moved to pour coffee. Thomas looked around, noticing a help wanted sign behind the counter. He wondered what it would be like working here every day. You hang your sign inside instead of in the window? Thomas nodded to the sign and the woman glanced at it too. Yeah, because I want to hire someone who already likes the bakery enough to come inside. Thomas smiled, paid for his order, and carried the plate and mug to a table by the window. He bit into the first tart and moaned with pleasure. That's the best sound a baker can ever hear. I'm Joe, and I own the bakery. Thanks. Well, I'm likely to make that noise again. These are really good, Thomas said. There was something about Joe that made a person want to smile, and he smiled at her again. That's great. Joe's attention was drawn to the door at the tinkle of the shop bell. Thomas finished his coffee and put the mug on the plate, then carried both to the small counter. You didn't have to do that. I pick up, all part of the service. It's no problem. Thanks. I enjoyed every bite. My pleasure. Come back. I will. A quick glance again at the help wanted sign and Thomas left the bakery. The local employment office was straight ahead on the next block. 3 days later, nothing new was up on the job boards. He thought about the bakery, about the help wanted sign, and decided to see if it was still there. Why not? He qualified for one of Joe's requirements. He liked the bakery well enough to go inside. And there she was, like on Monday, but this time filling the display case with cinnamon buns. I came to ask about the job. A couple of beats, and Joe said, You work in a bakery before? No, but you show me what to do and I'll do it. Well, this isn't an easy job. There's heavy lifting, it's hot, and we start before the crack of dawn. I lift weights. I can take the heat, and I'm an early riser. Another silence. Let's start this conversation again. What's your name? Thomas Locke, out-of-work welder with a snowball's chance of getting a job. Oh, this job won't pay what a trade does. I get that, but I'm ready for a change. Okay, let's go in back. Thomas followed Joe into a large open area, accessed by a swinging door. Straight ahead, he counted 3 tall racks loaded with loaves of bread and trays of other baked goods. On the right, 2 long work tables filled the space in front of the ovens. A table and chairs like the ones out front sat in a corner, and a coffee service sat on the counter there. "Sit down and I'll get us some coffee." Thomas shrugged out of his jacket. Joe wanted someone built for heavy lifting. He didn't mind showing off what he had. She returned with coffee and a couple of cinnamon buns. These guys didn't make the cut. Thomas's mouth watered and his stomach growled loud. "I'm guessing you like cinnamon buns," Joe laughed. "I like anything sweet." "Me too. There aren't too many thin bakers in the world." Another smile. "Go ahead, Thomas, enjoy." He didn't need a second invitation. He picked up a fragrant cinnamon bun and bit into it. Heaven. The cream puff was good, but these made him a whole new memory. He ate them both, and Joe was quiet, watching him eat and sip his coffee. Then she said, "Be right back." She walked down a short hallway, and when she came back, she held a stack of clothes: white shirt, white pants, an apron trimmed in red, and a red hat, which she handed to him. His first thought was, "I'm going to look like a damn lighthouse." "Welcome to Joe's," she said. "Thanks, I'll do my best for you." "I expect you to. Show up for 4:30, okay? Not 5, not 5:15, 4:30. Got it?" "Got it." "Come on, I'll show you where you can store your uniform and where you change." 2 weeks later, Thomas knew more about the operation of a bakery than he'd ever imagined. Did he like the job? No, not everything about it. Joe was right about the heat. When all the ovens were in operation, the place was sweltering. The air conditioning barely made a nudge toward comfort. How am I doing for time? Good?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Okay. During breaks, there's only 2 more pages before I decided it was 20 minutes. So during breaks and quiet times, he and Joe exchanged life histories. He'd learned that she'd never married, and she knew he got dumped. She knew about his father. He knew that she'd left home when she was young and never looked back. No details further on that. She lived in a small apartment over the store, and to his surprise, she told him she owned the building. "So what's up with you today, Thomas? No jokes, no running commentary about the heat, the cleanup, the smell of sugar?" "I got a call from my dad last night. He's coming down for a medical appointment tomorrow. He's spending the night at my place." "Health issues?" "No, he has an annual checkup at a clinic down here. He's likely to outlive me, to tell you the truth. Wait until he gets a load of my new job, though." Thomas was immediately embarrassed by his words. At his age, he didn't need to answer to anyone, especially his father, but worse, he sensed he'd hurt Joe's feelings, implying the job was beneath him. "Nothing wrong with being a baker," Joe said as she sipped her coffee. "Listen, I know this isn't your dream job. If you want, I can cut your final check, and all this will be our little secret." "No, Joe, I like the job." "Even though?" Thomas raised his eyebrows in a silent question. "The heat, the lifting, the cleaning, you haven't been exactly quiet about your feelings." "Oh, well, that's my way of getting through a day. I like the job. I swear I do. I love the baked goods, especially the ones that don't make it. Seriously, I can deal with my father and his opinions." Thomas thought of those words when he was sitting across from his father that night, watching his eyes widen. A bakery? What happened to your welding career? Thomas's father kept his gaze on him, and there it was, the feeling of failure Thomas had tried to stay away from his whole life. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. That is very interesting.
Thank you.
It's always interesting learning about another profession, and how I love to learn the little details about bakeries and things like that. So a fun read.
Thank you. I worked in a bakery for 4 years when I was a teenager.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're the resident expert on bakeries.
Oh, it was hell.
Okay, thank you. And tasty ones too. So that brings our readings to a close for the evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you will all be able to join us again in November when the theme, I believe, will be sunshine, moonlight, and darkness. So thank you, everybody, and take care, and see you soon.